Hi, I'm Gail Street. In 2006, Paths to the Present presented a series of episodes about Montgomery County's Great Road. That's Route 355 to us today. A lot of history happened along that major artery, and we want to rerun that series for you. Because the series is a few years old, some of the people interviewed have moved on to other positions. Also, in a few cases, the structures presented have been altered. But regardless, this series of shows gives you a sense of just how much history happened up and down this corridor. So, without further ado, let's follow again the Great Road. It's got different names depending on where you are. Wisconsin Avenue, Rockville Pike, Hungerford Drive, Frederick Road. We're talking about Route 355. Everyone knows it as a highly congested artery that frustrates most drivers and frightens many pedestrians. It's the most heavily traveled road in this county, and because of that, many go to great lengths to avoid it. From the very beginning, the road has been a landmark in Montgomery County. It got its start as a Native American trail, crisscrossing streams through woods and open spaces. Later, it came to be called the Great Road by the farmers who sent goods down to the port of Georgetown. Today, a drive up 355 reveals the extremes of urban, suburban, and rural landscapes. So sit back as Paths to the Present spends a year traveling the Great Road. Our exploration of Route 355 continues. Last show, we focused on Bethesda, exploring sites in the Central Business District. But we're not quite finished with that town yet. Today, our first stop is the building that gave Bethesda its name. On a hill overlooking the pike sits the Bethesda Meeting House. This wood-framed church dates to 1850. It replaced an 1820 stone structure after it was gutted by fire. Originally, this was the Bethesda Presbyterian Church. The name Bethesda comes from the Bible. It means house of mercy. As the community around this church grew, it came to be called the Bethesda District. Many people believe that this was the first Presbyterian church to be built in the county. President Lincoln occasionally attended services here, and General Jubal Early searched it during his raid on Washington in 1863. The church was sold in 1925 and changed hands several times until the Temple Hill Baptist Church acquired it in 1950. The adjacent cemetery remains Presbyterian. If you're paying attention to your geography, you'll notice that we skipped over two very prominent Bethesda landmarks that sit facing one another just south of here. Of course, we're talking about the National Institutes of Health and the National Naval Medical Center. These institutions have been integral in modern-day Bethesda's growth and development. We'll get to those in a moment, but first, let's look at what was there before. A stream runs through the NIH property. You could see it best near Woodmont Avenue, just down the hill from the National Library of Medicine. It's here that archaeologists found prehistoric artifacts, like these carvings made of quartz. They confirm that Native Americans camped here as they traveled the Great Road. In the early 1900s, this stretch of Rockville Pike was drawing wealthy Washingtonians wishing to escape the city's summer heat. They built elegant mansions set on large tracts of land. Some still exist today. The oldest is Perry House. Samuel Perry built this farmhouse in 1854. It's set on 444 acres, some of which is now the property of the Naval Hospital. Over the years, the house was transformed to a gentleman's estate. Today, it's still privately owned. Until 1998, it was the home of Clark Clifford, Secretary of Defense to President Johnson and advisor to many presidents. Wild Acres sits just off Rockville Pike on Grosvenor Lane. Built in 1928, it was home to the first editor-in-chief of National Geographic, Gilbert Grosvenor. He lived here for 38 years with his wife, Elsie Mae Bell, the daughter of Alexander Graham Bell. Today, their home is the headquarters of the Society of American Foresters. Stone Ridge School took over this estate home in 1947. Known as Hamilton House, this was the home to lawyer and dean of Georgetown's law school, George Hamilton. He bought the land in 1904 and constructed a wood frame home, which was later expanded and bricked over. Stone Ridge, as it was called at the time, sat on 368 acres of working farmland. Treetops was the home of Luke and Helen Wilson. It was built on a bluff amid a grove of trees. The surrounding farmland stretched almost as far as the eye could see. Today, Treetops is referred to as Building 16 on the NIH campus. Vicki Harden, now retired, was the director of the Office of NIH History and the Stetton Museum.
The Wilsons decided in the 30s to donate their land, their estate, to the government. And the National Institute it was singular, National Institute of Health at that time, which was the laboratory arm of the Public Health Service, was looking for a place to build an animal farm because it was located then at 25th and East Streets down near the Kennedy Center. And it was feeling the constraints. You cannot do good science if you don't take good care of your animals. Surgeon General Thomas Perrin and NIH Director Lewis Ryers Thompson decided they would rebuild the entire campus in Bethesda, the entire NIH campus, with an eye to expanding. They acquired the property from the Wilson family, and they got plans drawn for the first 5 buildings and got Congress to allocate funds. These are the old buildings on campus that are built in this Georgian red brick style. They look a lot like the University of Maryland. And as the buildings were completed, different laboratories moved out here, so that some of the laboratories began to move in 1939. In 1940, President Roosevelt came out in the fall and dedicated the campus. The last laboratories left moved in 1941, and at that point, the entire campus had shifted to Bethesda.
By that time, the NIH property totaled 70 acres. In addition to the 5 original buildings, the National Cancer Institute was created. Adjacent land to the south had been another large family estate with 2 houses on it. Armistead Peter, a physician who tended patients during the Civil War, built Winona soon after the war ended. Stone House was built in 1930 on land inherited by George Freeland Peter, son of Armistead. Today, the entire Peters farm is a part of NIH. Stone House is a conference center. Winona is no longer standing, but it didn't go directly to NIH.
The Peters sold the property to the Town and Country Golf Club, which was a golf club comprised primarily of German Jewish people who were trying to build a club out in the suburbs. It became known as the Woodmont Country Club because it was on Woodmont Avenue, and everyone called the property the Woodmont area. That property then, they used Winona as the clubhouse, and they built a big golf course in front of it.
After World War II, NIH began expanding in earnest. Money was allocated by Congress to purchase the neighboring land and to create a number of new institutes.
In addition to NIH singular and the Cancer Institute, the Congress created the Mental Health Institute, the Dental Institute, the Heart Institute, and in the Heart Institute legislation in 1948, they said, with all these institutes, we should call the umbrella organization National Institutes of Health, plural, and that's how the name became plural.
In the beginning, NIH was purely a research facility, but with the opening of the Clinical Center in 1953, it became a place where research directly supported patient care. Today, the 60-building campus employs over 1,800 people, a third of which are scientists. Through its countless discoveries, this institution has made vital contributions to the world of biomedical science. For detailed information on the history of NIH and its many accomplishments, visit their website at www.history.nih.gov.
I want to know why my hair is falling out. I don't even look like me anymore. How did this happen?
For answers, ask your doctor the right question. Could I have lupus?
Directly across the street from NIH stands the National Naval Medical Center. President Franklin Roosevelt is credited with bringing this institution to Montgomery County. The story goes that one day while driving in the countryside, he spotted this land and said, "That is where I'm going to build my hospital." Mike Jones began working in human resources at the National Naval Medical Center in 1951. Because of her longtime association with this institution, she's become the unofficial historian. She explains Roosevelt's interest in this building.
He always talked about a place of healing, and I suspect part of that came from his own illness and disability. But he also was interested in architecture, and he was dead set on being a part of the way this building was constructed. And in the original sketch that we have, you can see that he not only patterned it after that Nebraska building, but he drew his own design on both sides of the stationary and said, "This is the way I want it."
Ground was broken June 29, 1939. Construction took 3 years. Slowly, this rural landscape along a 2-lane Rockville Pike was transformed. On August 31, 1942, FDR dedicated this 10-building complex with a 20-story Art Deco tower as its centerpiece.
All the patient care was in the tower initially when the hospital opened, and beginning on the 3rd floor at that time were the radiology, and we also had the lab on the 4th floor, and we had the labor and delivery room, and on the 5th floor was the newborn nursery, and above that was pretty much where it started the patient spaces, because those were the main areas where tests were done and results were needed, including the OR was also, the operating room was up there. Presidential suite was on Tower 17, and of course that was closely guarded and very quiet.
Because every president has been treated here at one time, the National Naval Medical Center is known as the President's Hospital. In fact, the hospital's connection to one president is etched in history. President Kennedy's body was brought here after he was assassinated on November 22, 1963.
The whole public, I think all of Bethesda, all of Montgomery County, gathered outside on Wisconsin Avenue. Literally, the cars parked side by side, bumper to bumper. You could not get a car through from Cedar Lane to Jones Bridge. And people came over what was not a very sturdy security fence and just swamped the place. His body was brought here later. Actually, our morgue entrance was not very far from where we stand now, and so it was difficult keeping people away, but they actually had a plan where they had two hearses, one with his body and one without. And the ploy was to be able to get the one with his body to the morgue without the mob scene, and it was successful.
Today, the National Naval Medical Center has grown in size and scope. This 88-building campus now employs over 4,500 people and includes a premier training institute. Inpatient care now takes place in this modern 216-bed hospital. FDR's tower is still in use and has been designated a historical landmark. We wrap up this episode here at the base of the Linden Oak. This magnificent tree is estimated to date back to 1716. Apparently, it influenced Metro's path before it opened in 1984. The story goes that the community members rallied to save the tree, requiring a $2 million realignment of the Red Line. Overhead, we see not only the Metro track, but also signs for 495, the Capitol Beltway. Fully completed in 1964, this circumferential highway offered easy transportation around the nation's capital, at least for a while. It also took some property in its wake. The nearby neighborhood of Pook's Hill got its name from an estate that was demolished for the Beltway. This Tudor-style mansion sat on 103 acres with a gatehouse and a pond. The Rudyard Kipling story Puck of Pook's Hill inspired its owner, Merle Thorpe, to name the home Pook's Hill.
America is turning over a new leaf. The SmartWay leaf from the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency. The SmartWay leaf will help you identify environmentally friendlier cars and trucks that can save you money. These vehicles are certified to be more fuel efficient and produce fewer greenhouse gases. And look for renewable fuels to improve our energy independence. Follow the leaf to epa.gov/smartway.
So far, our journey along Route 355 has taken us through Friendship Heights, Somerset, and into Bethesda. Most recently, we saw examples of summer estate homes that were once plentiful along Rockville Pike between Bethesda and Rockville. Here's one more. The building we know today as Strathmore Hall was built in 1902 as a summer home for D.C. Commissioner James Oyster. Back then, the front of the house faced Washington, D.C. to the south. In 1908, it was purchased by Charles and Hattie Corby, who altered and enlarged the building for their permanent residence. The Corbys owned it until 1941. For a short while, it was a Catholic school run by the Sisters of the Holy Cross. In 1979, Montgomery County purchased the mansion on 11 acres with an eye to creating an art center. Today, Strathmore Hall is thriving alongside the newly created Music Center at Strathmore. When this mansion was first built, it was surrounded by farmland. By then, farmers were producing mostly grains and raising dairy cattle. But nearly 100 years earlier, tobacco was the cash crop, and it was most often produced by slave labor. Osborne Sprigg Wilson was both a tobacco farmer and an innkeeper. His home, Wilson's Tavern, was a popular stopping point for many travelers. Today, that house is gone, but the land it stood on is now home to Georgetown Preparatory School. Looking around the Georgetown Prep campus, one immediately gets a sense of tradition. It's a Jesuit school with a history that began well before these buildings were constructed. Dating to 1789, Georgetown Prep is the oldest Catholic boys' high school in the nation. Its founder, John Carroll, the first Archbishop of Baltimore, chose the District of Columbia for its original location. Stephen Oates has been teaching history at Prep since 1977. He describes the school's early years.
Both Georgetown Prep and Georgetown University began as one school. The Academy on the Potomac was basically a prep school, a school for teenagers and younger boys. There were a few college men. It was called Georgetown College, but the vast majority of students at what is now Georgetown University were prep students throughout most of the 19th century. They were first in a building called Old South. That's no longer there at the university. It was demolished about 1900. A second building was built across from Old South, and that was Old North, which is still there today, 1795. So the school was small. It was an intimate kind of atmosphere. It grew with the 19th century, again, the vast majority of students being prep students with some college men.
Over the years, both the college and the prep school grew and expanded. The schools were developing individual identities, and by the early 20th century, it was time to split apart.
In the early 20th century, there was a lot of pressure from the accreditation agencies that were just growing up to have colleges separate from their preparatory departments. In addition, there was the idea, or Father Donnelly, the president, believed that relocating the boys to the countryside would be healthier for them. So he began to explore that idea.
In 1915, Georgetown University purchased 90 acres of farmland from Hilary Offutt. His family continued to live in their home, which sat just north of campus along Rockville Pike. The first building on the Georgetown Prep campus was Boland Hall. Finished in 1918, it housed classrooms, dormitories, and eating areas for students and teachers, as well as a small chapel. It's been expanded twice, once in 1924 and again in 1928. In 1933, this chapel was built next door. An anonymous donor made it possible to proceed with the construction during the Great Depression. In 1920, the school had a population of 60 students, the majority of whom were boarders. Today, most of the 400 young men who attend Georgetown Prep are day students. While the school has grown and developed through the centuries, it still maintains its ties to its Jesuit roots.
It's a source that we always go back to in good times and in hard times, and that's the most enduring part of our history. It's the most important legacy that we leave also, that Ignatian identity, that tie to that Basque Saint Ignatius who started the Society of Jesus 450 more years ago.
For every pound you lose, that's 4 pounds of pressure off the knees. To find out more, go to fightarthritispain.org.
Every child is curious.
George, look what I found.
Turn their curiosity into a lifelong love of learning. Create a curious reader.
This is super bedtime reading.
Share a book together today. Visit read.gov.
Georgetown Preparatory School built its Montgomery County campus on a dairy farm that was owned by Hilary Offutt. His son, Edward Offutt, lived here in what is known as Addie's Restaurant today. In 1916, he opened Offutt's General Store right next door. Today, that building is Hank Diedel's, a popular bar. With all the surrounding development, it's hard to imagine what this spot looked like all those years ago. We're lucky to have some help. Meet Mary Catherine Offutt Stubbs, the daughter of Edward and granddaughter of Hilary. When she was a girl, the Pike was very different.
I'm sure it was still a 2-lane road when I was little, and I don't know when it was converted and it became a 3-lane road. And they called it kind of a suicide road. The middle lane was for passing, and both sides of the road used that. And there wasn't too much between our place and Rockville. Farms or, open spaces, a house here and there. And I guess the same way going down to Bethesda.
Mary Catherine's father built their home in the early 1930s right next to his already operating store.
It was a general store. They had gas pumps out front. They had groceries inside. They had a beer counter. You had ice cream in the back room. You had feed for chickens. They even had a little lift out on the side in the back that I guess you oiled and greased the car on. So, it was a little bit of everything. And because we didn't have the grocery stores we have today, all the supermarkets or what have you. As far as I can remember, I think there was a Safeway in Rockville. But we got everything through Daddy, and, he cut meat. You just had everything that you needed.
Today, White Flint Mall sits right across the street. It was touted as a huge success when it first opened in 1977, complete with upscale stores, an eatery, and even a disco. But Mary Catherine remembers what was there before.
Where White Flint Mall is now, there was the White Flint Golf Course, and it was a public course. You didn't have to be members to come there and play, and as long as I could remember, it was there until it closed down, and I think it was kind of vacant a little while before the mall was built.
Moving up the Pike, we come to what is today the Mid-Pike Plaza. It was built in 1963 with Corvettes as its anchor. In general, the 1960s saw a boom in shopping center development along Rockville Pike. This supergiant opened at Montrose Crossing in 1962. Today, we know it as the Gourmet Giant, and Montrose Crossing has more than quadrupled in size. Right nearby, tucked amid some trees, is the Montrose School. Today it's a daycare center, but in 1909, when it was built, this was a public school, grades 1 through 8. Eleanor Cunningham started the first grade in 1929, along with her twin sister. She remembers it well.
The layout was 2 rooms. The primary grades were on the right-hand side, and the other grades were on the left-hand side. There were no restrooms and no running water. The restrooms were outside on the west side of the school. And the school was built with a special design that had just come out for schools. And this is unique in that it was one of the first that was built in this architecture.
Eleanor grew up right down the road from the school in a Sears and Roebuck house that her father built. Today, her home is gone, and Maple Avenue is no longer residential. In fact, the whole area is far different from what Eleanor remembers.
It was not nearly as busy as it is now. Very few cars on the road. It was a narrow macadam road, maybe 2 lanes. We did ride the streetcar once in a while, but usually on Saturday night, Dad would get us into his Model T Ford, drive us to Rockville, get the groceries, and always finish up the outing with ice cream cones for each of us. So it was a very quiet neighborhood. We had friends that we played with, and it was a good place to grow up.
From 1900 until 1935, the trolley provided an inexpensive way to travel. 50 cents bought you a one-way ticket between Washington, D.C. and Rockville, which took about an hour. For the most part, the tracks paralleled the Great Road. However, in Bethesda, they veered off to the east, rejoining the Pike at Montrose. This is the trolley stop that used to stand near Montrose Road. Notice that the cross street is unpaved. There was also a stop in front of this general store near Halpine Road. Today, it's a strip mall that houses this Radio Shack. Directly across the street is Congressional Plaza. There's a rich history here. Before it was a shopping center, this was the Congressional Airport and School of Aeronautics. When it first opened in 1929, this was the only private airfield in the county. At one time, it housed up to 65 planes, many privately owned, and was home to the Civil Air Patrol. Longtime residents remember it well.
It was a small airport. Just small planes came in there, no large planes. And I remember very often in the summertime, they would put on air shows, and we would stand in our upstairs window, and we could see the sky, and we could see the airplanes, and we could see them do parachute jumping. I remember one day we saw the parachute did not unfold. It didn't open, and the man landed in a tree. But I don't think he died. I think he was okay.
The airport closed in 1958, and within a year the site was redeveloped as a shopping center to serve all the new homes that had been built nearby. Congressional Plaza opened in 1959, featuring 35 stores, including a Giant and a J.C. Penney's. We end this show with a name we've heard before. In 1916, Woodmont Country Club was established in the district. Then it was known as the Town and Country Club and was an exclusive club for German Jewish men. 6 years later, it moved to Bethesda, changing its name to Woodmont, like the street that ran nearby. In 1950, to make way for the National Library of Medicine, it relocated again to its current location along Rockville Pike. Well, that's all the time we have for this show. I'm Gail Street. I'll see you next time.